Hello and welcome to ESG Talk. We're so glad that you decided to listen in to today's conversation or watch it on YouTube. We take it really seriously that you are a co-producer of the show. So please give us the ratings, comments, or feedback, both here where you listen to your podcast or on my LinkedIn or at ESG Talk on Twitter. We need you to help us continue to shape the show and episode. Well, I'm excited. Here's why. Today's guest, we have Jared Forman from FORVIS. Not only is Jared a seasoned practitioner around risk, he is credentialed with, and I'm going to read this to make sure that I get it right, Sustainability and Climate Risk Certified, Financial Risk Manager through the Global Service of Risk profession. He grew up as an actuary in his career. And what I'm excited to bring his risk experience to you is I actually brought Jared in as a consultant for our own environment, social, and governance practice as it relates to climate risk and ESG risk scenario testing. I feel that his approach and FORVIS approach is exactly what you need when you're beginning your journey. It's a way of simplifying, and I thought he would be an excellent expert to bring to our listeners today. So Jared, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Mandy. Very excited for this.
So fun. Since we know each other a little bit, we also want to help our listeners as they're coming in today to get to know you a little bit more. And if you've watched some of the other episodes, which I know you have, because you're one of the people who've given me feedback, and I really, really appreciate it. We start off with some conversation starters to help everyone get to know you a little bit more. What are some diverse things that have shaped your work in risk management and ESG now? Tell us about something that really shaped you that was maybe unexpected.
Yeah, it's a good question. And really, I don't know if I could pinpoint one thing, but it's kind of this slow build over time. I started my career, as you mentioned, as an actuary. So understanding pension risk management issues and especially during the global financial crisis, seeing how underwater pensions had become and the unexpected funding requirements that they had, was my first kind of taste into how important risk management is. I then shifted over to the advisory side of the business and was helping global financial institutions to respond to a lot of the risk management and regulatory requirements stemming from the global financial crisis as well. I guess that is my one kind of critical moment of my career now that I'm thinking about it. So help them to stand up their risk management protocols, which has served them very well in the past couple of years. And then as I was having conversations, over the past 3 years with clients, their major concerns were no longer, market credit and operational risk traditional. Obviously, there's still concerns, but they manage them well. It was these kind of global transverse risks, these newer ESG type risks that kept coming up in conversation. And that's where, I've pivoted and kind of focused my career on.
I really appreciate your background. And one of the things that I loved about your pension experience is that as you look at regulation around different states, there are some pensions that do have it, some that don't. And there's a good, healthy debate that's happening with pension funds around where is the role of risk and where is the role of risk versus return and how do we manage that together. So I'm so delighted to have your experience and be able to share that not only with our own internal team at Workiva, but also our wonderful customers and potential customers and audience listeners that are tuning in today. So tell us something, things that fill your workday outside of work. So we got to pivot a little bit about your background. Tell us about something that takes up your time, a hobby or something you enjoy.
Yeah, I wish a hobby took up my time, but I've got 3 young kids, so they take up all my time. And I'm in the stage where there's milestone after milestone for each one. So navigating that is really what I focus on. So I've got a 6-year-old that I'm trying to teach how to ride a bike. Apparently, you're not supposed to just put them on and let them go. That does not work. So learning that, doing sight words with him, and then my 4-year-old's learning how to swim. And then my 1.5-year-old, I'm still trying to teach how to stay alive in day-to-day kind of activities.
I often call it, when I worked in higher education, I used to say, it's the decade of decisions, right? That 18, into your 20s. And as you move on into the 30s and 40s, I talk about it being the decade of care, right? You're caring for these humans that you may have brought in the world. You're caring for maybe siblings if you have others that you need to continue, or parents or grandparents. So it truly is, like you said, a time that becomes different. You and I had a joking time where we talked about in our profession, we're actually older, we're dinosaurs. I talk about working for a tech company where the average age is 35. So I'm not gray haired, but I'm the old person in the room. Was there a time where you feel like your age has shown this year?
I'm reminded every day, right? And to some extent, I like it in that experience does count for something, and I'm leveraging everything I've learned throughout my years of risk consulting and applying it now. But it's a sobering reminder when you say a joke that just doesn't land, and I probably had said that beforehand, but or your references start to get outdated. So just case in point, I was talking about movies the other day, and my classics are Back to the Future and Shawshank Redemption. And some people that I was talking to had never seen them, and their classics were Legally Blonde and Shrek. So very, very different now.
Yeah. Or Top Gun. It's like, before you go see it, make sure to watch the original. Yeah, because then you'll actually appreciate the one that's out now. That was my reference this week, was something from the previous Top Gun movie. So all good. So let's segue from the joys of experience and being in this decade to how that experience has shaped our work today as we think about simplifying risk. So how do you approach companies as they come to you and they're like, okay, I know that there's risk with environment, social, and governance that we need to consider, and we need to we're starting our journeys. Let's talk that first. If you're starting your journey, how can somebody manage and simplify risk? If they have a really strong risk management program, how do they implement it? So let's start with the starting of the journey.
Yeah, it's a really good kind of segue into how experience does matter, and how existing processes can be tweaked at companies where, every company manages risk. And on the governance side of the ESG umbrella, I think we've done a very good job at that over time. So there's a lot of companies that are managing their kind of financial reporting risk or their cybersecurity risk. On the social and environmental side, it becomes a little less clear and less focused historically. So I think it starts with definition, right? And defining what these new risk types are. When people think about climate change risk, there's not a lot of organizations that have really invested a ton of time in defining what that means for them. So looking at what the physical risk exposure is, what the transition risk exposure is, which means, changes or risks from changing from a brown economy to a greener economy, and that includes policies in the future that are implemented and how that might impact an organization, or technological change, or shifting preferences from the customers. So laying that all out and defining it, I think, is very important so that everyone's kind of on the same page. And then understanding how to embed these risk types into their current processes. So if you have a existing risk identification process, add these to the consideration of material risk identification. If you have a process that is going to be impacted by social risk or environmental risk, understanding and reviewing those processes to implement new controls to mitigate the occurrence of these risk types or their overall impact. And then adding things like measurement through scenario analysis, which I know we're going to talk about, so that you can start to really plan for mitigation of these risk types, as well as how you might react if they were to manifest, which all indications are that these are going to on a more frequent basis going forward across not just climate change, but overall social and governance as well.
And I think you have brought up a really good point as people begin their journey, really thinking about those key risk indicators. You have to back it up to what is your material issues as it relates to environment, social, and governance. Think about then how those material issues have key risk. And you may do that, like you said, in partnership. And I've seen this multiple times over and have experienced it, where you sit down with your chief risk officer or vice president of risk and the ESG team together, and you begin to look at what then are the key risk indicators that we already have, plot that out, that we have key maybe practices around, or existing operations or existing structures reporting into the board. And then what are the new things that we want to tackle? And where is it that we have to integrate, or where is it that we have to really take a step back and maybe do something new or different? Now, what I appreciated as we get into the regulation, as we get into around the globe, TCFD alignment, the Task Force for Climate Financial Disclosures, what we're seeing is companies now going, well, how do I do this risk scenario testing? And whether somebody's been really experienced in their journey or somebody is beginning their journey, FORVIS and your team have a really strong development of a risk scenario workshop. Talk to us about what that looks like. And that was one of the reasons I brought you in. I was like, whoa, this really simplifies risk scenario testing. Once you've gone through the step of material issues, then you dive into looking at the topics that you need to explore and uncover, and then you begin to bring that team together for risk scenario. Your model of a workshop truly simplifies it, whether you're integrating it or not. So tell us about it, please.
Sure, yeah. And it's been adapted through many years of deploying this for your more traditional risk types within the financial services space. So stemming, from that global financial crisis, and even beyond that, when ERM and just risk management processes were being implemented, this is a classic technique, right? Scenario analysis and kind of running through that. And what we mean by scenario analysis is analyzing plausible future scenarios, plausible future events that can occur to understand the implications for the organization. So it can be very, very powerful in terms of the outputs in understanding financial implications, in understanding operational implications of a risk manifestation. And so the process that we undertake, to your point, we've tried to simplify it as much as possible, because a lot of organizations that are looking at these risks are not financial services, right? They are now corporates that are new to this type of risk management. So having the process be simplified and straightforward is extremely important to making it work and having everyone participate at a high level. So the way that we do it is, to your point, risk identification is really where we start, and that includes data gathering as well. So you want to spend your time on analyzing the risks that really matter to you, right? So there's going to be nuanced risk types for each individual company, and there's some similarities across industries, but depending on your location, depending on your employee profile, depending on how you've set up your supply chain, there's certain risk types that are going to be more material for you. And that's really where you want to spend your time in analyzing. So once you choose, your top 5 to 10, 3 to 5, I would recommend choosing 3 to 5 if this is your first go round, and then kind of enhancing from there.
Yeah, let's just be really practical, and I'll give you permission. You can use Workiva and what we did together as the example to make it real for people. So we identified 3, and we chose to use E, S, and G. So we picked a scenario from each one where we felt like we had gaps. We do a lot of work around cybersecurity as a tech company and a company with finance. And so we looked at where were the opportunities for us to debate. The other part that I thought was really good about this workshop is we had a time where your team came in and did a little bit of education with our ESG task force. So our executive team that oversees the work that would debate the scenarios. And I thought that was really helpful, because what you said was so true, is that if you're in a finance team or a compliance team or a legal team, this is some terminology that you know. but your task force is made up of executives across the company that may not have that background. So it was really rooted in pre-education, pre-read, identifying 3 topics that could supplement, and then we went into the workshop. So that might be a way for people to think about it, is that education part is really key for that executive team too, looking at it.
Yeah, the success of the workshops also are based on the engagement of the stakeholders, right? So having enough preparation, having pre-reading material to ingest the scenario environment and really understand the implications of it so that it can be debated in that workshop is extremely important. And senior management buy-in on the overall process is critical here, so that you get engaging dialogue, you get provocative challenges potentially between participants, and a real multidisciplinary view of what would take place in a scenario like this, which can be anywhere from an event occurring within the next 3 years or something a little bit longer tailed, as particularly when it comes to climate change, that occurs, certain aspects of it 0 to 5 years, and then 5 to 10 years, and even beyond 30 years plus.
So as we transitioned from that like pre-read and education, then we moved into this interactive workshop around the 3 topics. And I think one of the things that was nice is then they really dove into the different scenarios. Talk to us a little bit about this approach, because it was more holistic. We were kind of piloting together. What if we went outside of just climate risk and actually looked at some of the social risk? And our example, and I'm happy to share this as others are learning, was what would happen within the governance risk was around our supply chain and code of conduct and supplier giving us their environment, social governance data. And what happens if they don't meet a goal, which then would put our goals behind as a part of the supply chain, and the team coming together around how governance would approach that. How would we look at that, and what would be the risk or the damage to our company? Talk to us about helping teams make that transition from looking at just one side of ESG risk to really thinking about it as an ES&G risk to test with your team.
Yeah, I think that going through the scenario specification process is just a critical element here. And you're really marrying the risk types that you find with detailed specification of how it might manifest for the organization itself. And the indirect impacts are something to think about here. It's very, not very, but it is straightforward to think about, what happens if we have a cybersecurity breach, right? You can kind of go through that process, and most companies have done it and lay out the implications of that scenario. But it's a different thing to say, well, we've set net zero targets, or we've set these goals related to ESG, whatever KPI, we're measuring, but we're reliant on some of our suppliers to achieve this scope 3 reduction. What happens if they don't achieve their goals and we fail our goals, vis-a-vis them? How do we manage that? How do we implement governance around it? What is our reputational impact if our suppliers don't achieve their goals and we don't achieve ours? Do we have a reputational impact, right? And those are the debates that make the workshop so valuable and make this process so valuable, because you can design strategies to pivot, right? If you see that one of your suppliers are not achieving their goal and it's going to impact your achievement, then you can design strategies, right, to create an opportunity elsewhere where you're either moving away from a certain supplier, right, which hopefully you won't have to do, or you're going through the carbon credit program or some other solution to reduce overall emissions.
Well, I think that's really key and important, as we even talked about it from our own company standpoint, is it's not only thinking about you've made this commitment, but now we have regulation in different parts of the world, or proposals like we have with the SEC, where you are held accountable, or will be, or potentially held accountable for those commitments. And it's not just going to have a reputation impact, it's going to have a regulatory impact, and it's going to potentially, in some countries, have a financial impact pending your carbon emissions level. And so I do think that's a piece where getting in and starting somewhere with a deep workshop that looks at the collides of these issues is so important for companies to begin that journey. And again, I just love that it was a workshop. It was a great way for us to start. It was a great way for us to think holistically. And then we could move from there into like, okay, how do we want to integrate this more with our enterprise risk management, and where does that look like, and when do we need to supplement? We moved from that workshop to a time where the team came together and reviewed what the report to the board or to the nominating governance committee of the board would look like, that we would share a holistic picture of that to them, talk through, here's the plans that we have, here's where we have existing, here's yellow where we're starting, here's midterm, short-term, long-term approaches. How have you seen in your career the board engagement factor on ESG risk change in the last 18 months?
It's a really good question, and I've never seen anything like it, frankly. I mean, every board is interested in the topic. They want to learn more, right? And just having somebody on the board with ESG background and knowledge is getting very hard to come by, right? Because they're in such high demand, and the time and expense that it would take to get them is just very challenging. So, it's a board level issue. It's potentially, the number one or number two issue at the moment. We're doing a lot of board education as a firm overall. And we're just seeing it on the agenda, and committee charters being revised. Your nominating and governance committee is the one that oversees ESG risk, but we're seeing that across the board, and it's organizations big and small. It's not just public organizations that are concerned about this, but also middle market companies that have to contribute their data and their ESG performance to their suppliers, as we talked about. They have to be concerned about ESG as well.
Well, and I think that's a piece where you brought up as ESG as a field grows, we're seeing this like threefold increase. And we've talked on the show with other guests on the C-suite role for environment, social, and governance. And I think we're going to see a broader engagement around how are we thinking about our board. And one of the things Workiva did as we prepared for our board of directors survey was we went through our board of directors survey and we asked each of our material issues, what was the board experience around those material issues for environment, social, governance? Then in the proxy statement, we disclosed a bubble chart that really showed our board experience across all those issues. So it allows us as a company to look and say, where are the gaps that we have where we need to increase? And on what material topics as it relates to environment, social governance, do we need to lean in more to certain board members who have that experience? And so I often challenge people. We hear so much about the diversity of a board, and looking at gender and looking at other elements. And I'm all for the diversity of thought and the diversity of a board, and an advocate that diversity builds better business results. I think we have to really start to talk about ESG experience as it relates to the business value and the material issues, and making sure that board members are being evaluated on that broader lens than just kind of a narrow lens. And I hope that's where the future goes.
Yeah, I mean, I love that. I think that's a great example of very strong governance side reporting within the overall ESG umbrella. And you're right in that it should be also integrated to the overall ESG program. Right. So when you look at your material ESG topics that you've, put on your materiality matrix, which we often see, how are you capturing the governance of that from the board of directors? Right. And it also can be applied to senior management as well. So as you're going through senior management reviews and performance assessment, who is capturing the delegation of the governance and oversight of ESG risks from the board into operationalizing it through the C-suite.
Oh, a whole discussion for another show on comp, exec comp and accountability. Jared, we're coming to the close. This time went by so fast. And again, just have greatly valued you as a partner. We talk on the show about technology, talent, and teachers. And I just am so thankful for how you taught me to simplify risk scenario testing, really make it practical, and find a way to begin the journey here at our own company at Workiva. And I just want to thank you personally for sharing that knowledge with myself and with our team and with our executives. As we close out, I'd like to hear from you. What do you think people should be reading, watching, or listening to over the next 3 months to really help them as they contemplate ESG risk for their organization?
Well, first off, thank you as well, for the opportunity to work with your team. I thought it was a really fun engagement, and just seeing how engaged the Workiva team was in scenario analysis was just very refreshing to witness. So appreciate that. In terms of where people can curate their information, which becomes more and more of a challenge when it comes to ESG. ESG Talk for sure should be on their subscribe button for podcasts. But FORVIS website has a lot of great information and thought leadership articles around ESG topics and risk management in particular. And then I think two other sources do a great job at curating the right information. So one is the Global Association of Risk Professionals. They have a really good sustainability and climate risk website that has a lot of publications and interesting articles. And ESG Today, is just a great website that brings the latest news. That's just a very quick hitter kind of update on major developments in the area.
Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you, everyone who are listening in both here and around the world, wherever you may be listening to your podcast. We appreciate your feedback and your time. And we would just want to end with, if you want to connect more, in the show notes, we'll put a link to what Jared talked about, the FORVIS website, including his LinkedIn. And I just encourage you, as you go through the process, to find those great colleagues like Jared, whether they're on your own risk team or like a teacher or consultant like he is, to join you in your journey. And it will ultimately make you, your board, and your organization stronger. We'll talk real soon.